Well, hi there. My name is Alora, and I'm from Firebird Summit. And I wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about success, most particularly how we define it and why exactly that is. So, I was listening a few weeks ago to the really great podcast called Disrupt Yourself by Whitney Johnson. And she was interviewing one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown. And it was really fantastic to hear their conversation because in the course of it, Brene discussed something that I hear all the time with the women in their 40s that I work with. And that is that in all of the great success that she's had recently, she's started businesses, she's launched initiatives, she's met people and done really bigger and more interesting, complicated things. And in the process, all of her success began to be marked by the idea of going further and going faster. And so this further, faster model started driving everything that she was doing and everything that was coming up in her business and in her life. And she said something really fascinating on this podcast, which was she's recently started to become aware that she actually really hates it. And that as she started thinking about it, she's discovered that for her, in her life and on a daily basis, she actually prefers slower and closer to further and faster. And I love that she said this because it's something that I hear so frequently. I talk to women in their 40s all the time who have hit a point in their life where they're ready for a change. And more often than not, they don't know exactly what that change needs to be. But they just know that something about what they have historically done doesn't work for them anymore. And more often than not, one of the biggest drivers is how they have been defining success. And further faster is a model that we all tend to be fed in school and in business. And so one of the things that comes up frequently is this idea that bigger, faster, farther, scalable, those things sound great, but they get increasingly impersonal over time. And what was really great about listening to Brene discuss this was she led right into the thing that drives most of the women that I have this conversation with, which is a need to prove themselves. Sometimes they need to prove themselves to somebody else. Parents are frequently big drivers here. Sometimes it's just to prove it to themselves. But at some point, they hit a tipping point where they no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone, at which point, all of a sudden, everything starts to change for them. And this leads me to a great conversation I had with a woman that I met when I was on vacation in the Mexican state of Puebla last week. She was telling me about this enormously successful business that she used to run. And she and some business partners had spent most of her 30s and into her 40s running this company. And they did large production of events and artistic and creative, both events, but shows and things like that in London, in and around London. And she hit a point in her mid 40s where she started feeling like that wasn't working for her anymore. And it was that sense of further and being distant from the people she was really trying to work with. It was too impersonal and it was too fast. And so she made what might be the greatest, most metaphorical pivot in her career that I could imagine for this, which is she went from being an entrepreneur who ran a successful business to pivoting her entire career to becoming a midwife. And so she went from the extremely impersonal, large-scale production and business running exercise that she was doing for years to now she works with very individualized cases for women who are having babies. And I can't think of anything that's a more personal transformation than that. And it manifests itself in absolutely everything. And so as I'm listening to her talk, I realized while our careers were completely different, the journey was very, very similar. I spent most of my career driving to further and faster. That was what was successful. And I now realize I had a lot of people I was trying to prove things to, a lot to myself, but it was always measured by how far and how fast and how big and how explosive and how disruptive things could be. And once I discovered that actually I had proven anything I could ever want to prove to anybody else, as well as myself, it became completely obvious that I didn't want to do that anymore. And this is what I hear all the time from women who have hit a point where they know they need to make a change, but they're not sure what it is or how to go about it. So, the question this leaves me for you, and that I bring up all the time in these conversations, is what would make you feel successful if you did not feel the need to prove anything to anyone? So, I'll leave you with that thought. And I'd love to get any kind of comments you have, or you can shoot me an email at alora@firebirdsummit.com. I'd love to have this conversation. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you next week. Thanks.